The Visitor. It was Halloween night, and the town of Ashford was alive with the sound of children's laughter, the rustle of costumes, and the eerie flicker of jack-o'-lanterns on every doorstep. Amelia watched from her window as trick-or-treaters darted through the streets below, their excited voices carrying up through the crisp autumn air. She had always loved Halloween, but this year was different. This year, something felt off. Her parents were away for the weekend, and she had the old house to herself. Normally, that would thrill her, an entire night of horror movies, candy, and solitude. But tonight the house felt too quiet, the shadows too deep. There was a chill in the air that the fire she'd lit in the hearth couldn't seem to chase away. Amelia wrapped a blanket around herself and sat on the couch, half watching an old black-and-white horror film. Her mind wandered to the strange news stories she'd read earlier that day, about the series of disappearances in the neighboring towns. 3 people had gone missing in the last week, all under mysterious circumstances. The only clue the authorities had were reports of a pale stranger seen wandering the streets late at night. The thought made her shiver. She shook it off, telling herself it was just Halloween nerves, and turned her attention back to the TV. A knock at the door made her jump. It was a little early for trick-or-treaters, but perhaps a few older kids were still out. She grabbed a bowl of candy and headed for the door, plastering on a smile to greet them. When she opened the door, her smile faltered. A man stood on her doorstep. He wasn't wearing a costume, at least not one she could recognize. He was tall, dressed in an immaculate black coat that looked almost old-fashioned. His skin was pale, deathly pale, and his eyes, an unsettling shade of dark red, glinted in the soft light of the porch. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. There was something wrong with him. His face was too perfect, his features sharp and angular, like a statue chiseled from marble. But there was no warmth in his expression, just cold, predatory amusement. "Good evening," he said in a smooth, deep voice that sent chills down her spine. "I seem to have lost my way. May I come in?" Amelia's instinct screamed at her to slam the door, to lock it and run. But something about his gaze held her in place, like a snake mesmerizing its prey. I don't think that's a good idea," she stammered, taking a step back. Her hand tightened around the doorframe. The man's smile widened, revealing sharp, gleaming teeth. Fangs. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice dripping with charm. "It's a cold night, and I'd hate to be out there all alone." Her heart pounded in her chest. Everything in her told her to say no, to close the door and lock it, but her body refused to move. The man took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've already let me in, Amelia." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't told him her name. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the open door, extinguishing the jack-o'-lanterns outside. The temperature dropped sharply, and the fire in the hearth behind her flickered and died. Darkness pressed in from all sides, and in the faint glow of the porch light, the man's eyes gleamed, red and hungry. Amelia took a shaky breath, her mind racing. She had heard the stories, the legends. Vampires couldn't enter a home unless invited. But had she? The question gnawed at her, and as she took another step back, she realized too late that her body had betrayed her. Her hesitation had been enough. The man's smile turned cruel. "I've been waiting a long time for someone like you," he whispered. "And now, you're mine." Before she could react, he moved, too fast to see, too fast to comprehend. One moment he was on the porch, and the next he was standing in her living room, inches from her. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening thud, and the house seemed to shift, the air growing thick with an unnatural tension. Amelia stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man's presence was suffocating, his gaze locking her in place as he slowly circled her, like a predator sizing up its prey. "I can hear your heartbeat," he said softly, his voice almost a purr. "I can smell your fear." His fingers brushed her cheek, cold as ice, and she flinched. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. "I won't kill you," he murmured, his breath hot against her neck. "Not yet." Amelia's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor, trembling. Tears filled her eyes as she looked up at him, her mind spinning in desperation. There had to be something. some way to stop him. But her thoughts were a jumble of terror and hopelessness. The vampire knelt beside her, his eyes burning with an ancient, unholy hunger. He tilted her head gently, his fingers trailing down her throat, finding the pulse that beat so frantically.